Arthur was the kind of man who seemed to possess everything most people only dream about. His business was thriving. His ranch stretched endlessly beneath wide-open skies, and best of all, he enjoyed private access to a pristine, shimmering lake. His days were packed with meetings, negotiations, and long hours managing operations, but his evenings belonged to something far more sacred. Peace, solitude in his prized luxury boat, the Serenity. Docking at his own private pier after a long day felt like the perfect ritual, a quiet reward for hard work. Or at least, that was how it used to be. One bright afternoon, the calm was shattered by flashing blue and red lights cutting across the shoreline. Arthur turned to see two police officers walking down the gravel path toward his dock. Leading them was a woman clutching a clipboard like a badge of authority, her expression sharp enough to sour milk. This was Karen, the newly elected HOA president, infamous for her overzealous enforcement and endless appetite for control. "That's him, officers," she declared, pointing a stiff finger at Arthur. "He's parked that ostentatious boat in a restricted community area. I demand be removed immediately." Arthur, who had just been preparing to cast a fishing line into the water, raised an eyebrow. He set his rod aside and approached calmly, offering the officers a courteous smile. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said evenly. "This dock and this section of shoreline are part of my private property." Karen scoffed loudly. "Ridiculous. The HOA bylaws clearly state this entire shoreline is designated community access. I have the documentation right here." She waved her clipboard dramatically, as if expecting applause. The officers exchanged uncertain glances before turning to Arthur. "Sir, can you verify that this is indeed your property?" "Absolutely," Arthur replied without hesitation. He retrieved his phone, navigated the county's official property records, and displayed the digital map. The clearly marked boundaries showed his land extending 100 feet into the lake, precisely where the Serenity was docked. Karen's face drained from fiery red to ghostly pale in seconds. The officers studied the screen, then turned back to her. "Ma'am," one officer said carefully, struggling to mask irritation, "it appears you've made an error. You're currently trespassing on Mr. Arthur's private property." For perhaps the first time in her life, Karen was speechless. The officers apologized to Arthur for the disruption and escorted a visibly fuming Karen back up the path, advising her confirm her facts before involving law enforcement again. Arthur watched them leave, though the serenity of his evening had already been disturbed. And this wasn't her first offense. Just the previous month, she'd lodged complaints about the shade of his mailbox. Before that, it was the height of his award-winning rose bushes. He had reached his limit. The constant interference needed to end, and not temporarily, but permanently. Arthur understood something important. Karen and the HOA drew their influence from one central pillar, the lakeside marina. It was the community's heartbeat. Their summer galas, boat expos, charity dinners, and social gatherings all revolved around it. The marina was their crown jewel, their symbol of relevance and prestige. Sitting on his porch as the sun dipped lower, Arthur felt an idea take shape. Bold, strategic, expensive. He spent the next hour making calls, not to friends, but to financial advisors and legal counsel. In doing so, he uncovered something intriguing. The lakeside marina, despite its glamorous exterior, was drowning in debt. The owners had overextended themselves and were quietly searching for a buyer to avoid bankruptcy. Arthur's smile returned, cooler, sharper than before. This was more than opportunity. It was leverage. He didn't just want to silence Karen. He wanted to dismantle the foundation beneath her authority. He placed one final call. "I want to acquire the lakeside marina," he instructed his acquisitions manager. "All of it. And I want the deal closed within the hour." 30 minutes later, after swift negotiations and a wire transfer substantial enough to stagger most people, Arthur became the sole proprietor of the lakeside marina. The transaction finalized with remarkable efficiency. The crown jewel of the HOA now belonged to him. That very evening, the HOA was holding a meeting in the marina's grand event hall. Arthur decided it was time for a formal introduction. He entered quietly as Karen was in the midst of an impassioned speech, ironically centered on maintaining community standards and unauthorized lakefront usage. Her voice faltered when she saw him. Hatred flickered across her face. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "This meeting is for homeowners only." Arthur offered a polite smile and walked toward the front of the room. Without speaking, he handed a document to the HOA's attorney. The lawyer's eyes widened as he reviewed the deed of sale. His face turned pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said unsteadily, "I would like to introduce the new owner of the Lakeside Marina, Mr. Arthur." A stunned silence rippled through the room. Gasps followed. Karen looked as though she'd just seen an apparition. Arthur addressed them calmly, his tone measured but commanding. "As the new owner of this facility, there will be changes. Effective immediately, the HOA's contract for use of this venue is terminated. All scheduled events are canceled." The reaction was immediate. Shocked whispers, disbelief, panic. "And secondly," he continued, locking eyes with Karen, "as a private property owner, I am exercising my right to ban you from these premises. Should you return without authorization, you will be treated as a trespasser." Karen stood frozen, rage and disbelief warring across her face. Words failed her. In less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode, her influence had evaporated. The meeting descended into chaos. But Arthur simply turned and exited. There was nothing more to say. Later that night, he sat aboard the Serenity, drifting peacefully across the glass-like lake. The sky burned in brilliant shades of orange and violet. No flashing lights. No shouting. No HOA theatrics. Just still water and silence. He hadn't just purchased a marina. He had secured his peace. As he took a sip of his drink and watched the final edge of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon, Arthur understood something new. He wasn't merely a successful businessman. He was now, undeniably, the king of the lake.